Good afternoon, and welcome again to my episodes of Woolfe's Weekly Warnings on the denial of Brexit by our elites and the way that the European Union seeks to undermine democracy, not only in Britain, but across the European Union. Now, Britain fought a Second World War, and its leader at the time, Winston Churchill, gathered together a coalition of people from different parties. He brought nations from across the world, and eventually we defeated the arrogance of the Germans, who at that time had a dictator under Hitler. He also defeated his allies, who were trying to destroy democracy across Europe and other parts of the world. But on the 4th of July, 1945, on the eve of a general election, Winston Churchill was faced with a very clear fact. The fact that he may not be elected Prime Minister of the country, despite leading the country to victory in the Second World War. And in that knowledge, even knowing that he'd put his heart and soul into the British people, he said the following: "I believe in the instinctive wisdom of our well-tried electorate." Winston Churchill knew that he may lose that election, but he believed in the will of the people and their choice. Now let's take that to our current set of political leaders, our members of Parliament, our members of the House of Lords, and members of the European Parliament here in which I sit today. Do they firmly believe in the instinctive wisdom of our well-tried electorate? Well, this week, and also more importantly next week, we'll see the culmination of hundreds of those elected politicians, thousands of their anti-democratic supporters and lackeys, and also their big financial backers, including billionaire non-UK citizens like Soros, bring their campaign together to try and deny, delay, and at the very least, damage Brexit. We have seen, under Andrew Adonis, lead the campaign in the House of Lords to put amendment after amendment in the UK withdrawal bill to ensure that we don't get Brexit. Next week, we will see in our Parliament the vote on the withdrawal bill, and we understand there could be at least up to 15 Conservative MPs who will not only oppose the will of those 17.4 million people who voted in the referendum, but go against their own party's manifesto and vote to stay in the customs union. A customs union, or some word to that effect, which will mean to all of us who understand this, that we have not left the European Union. We will be tied to their rules. We will be tied to the European Courts of Justice. We will be tied to paying in bills. We'll be tied into many of their programmes, even if it impacts our ability to have free trade arrangements with other countries on our terms, even if it means that we want to change our rules and diverge from the EU because it benefits our nation, our people, and those people are employed here. But no, those people will carry on and fight. And this week, we also saw that not only have we got those who are anti-British, anti-patriotic, and in my view, anti-Democrats fighting in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, our own television programmes showed that there were numbers of MEPs who are actively colluding with our European negotiators, i.e. those who want to get a better deal for themselves rather than Britain, in the belief that if they get a bad deal for Britain, then in that case we will have a second vote and vote to stay in the European Union and thus avoid democracy. We had the sight of Alan Smith, a Scottish National Party member, who is quite frankly probably at the bottom of the tree of all those elected for the SNP, whose very lifeblood, his very instinct is here in the European Parliament. Without it, I don't think he'd have any ability to even breathe and live. It's so part of himself. Sitting down at a table with a hostaf, trying to find ways to defeat Brexit. Alongside him was the Labour leader of the MEPs here, Richard Corbett, helping him along. And of course, there was the one Liberal Democrat in Catherine Bearder, actively trying to provide ways of showing that the European Union could have a better deal against Britain. Now, there were many people who apparently have criticised them, called them all sorts of names, like traitor. Well, that's for them to decide whether they are actually being traitorous. But my view is that if you have people voting to leave the European Union, a democratic nation would enact that vote first, make sure we leave, and if you don't like it, then campaign afterwards. But of course, they live here and work here in this institution, which actively says, on the one hand, we believe in democracy, but actually teaches us that you have to be anti-democratic. The will of the European Union matters first. And what have we seen this week? This week here, and last week in Strasbourg during the voting session, we've seen how, again, the European Union does not like the will of the people. In Italy, the Italian people voted en masse for the five-star movement Cinque Stelle and for Lega Nord, not for the elitist parties, but for those parties that wanted to stand up to the European Union. They created their own government. They did a coalition, but they put towards the Italian president a finance minister who had known to have concerns about the euro or whether Italy should be in it. And what did you see? That finance minister, no doubt backed and supported by the European Union, was pressurised into say no, nine, not at all to that individual. And so they get a constitutional crisis, a situation where a president was opposing the People's Party's own elected and selected candidate. But was he backed up by anyone else? Of course. A man by the name of Mr. Oettinger, who is the commissioner in charge of the funding of the European Parliament towards all the other countries, and had created the MFF, the multi-finance framework for Europe. He actively said to the European people and to Italy in a statement that the Italians had effectively voted for the wrong people, and the markets would tell the Italian people who they should be voting for. Just think about that. A commissioner here in the European Parliament telling the people of Italy not only have they voted wrong, but they should listen to the financial markets. Where is the democracy in that? Of course, you were then later heard another MEP, Marcus Ferber, who was the deputy chairman of the Economic Monetary Affairs Committee I sit on, being attacked by the chairman of that same committee for allegedly stating that the European Central Bank should step into Italy and control the country. You had the president of the Commission saying he was misquoted. Again, we all know Mr. Juncker saying that the Italians should work harder in the south and that once again they should not be controlled by populist parties. The clear idea is the Italian people voted wrong and they should vote again. And this time, get in the elitist parties. Where have we heard that before? We heard it in Ireland, where they had to vote again. We heard it in France, where they were told to vote again. We heard it in Holland, where they're told to vote again. We hear it in Brexit, where they're told we're not done it right and we should stay in the European Union in one way or form, being controlled by them. But this message across Europe, that the European Union is in control, is not just limited to Italy. We saw exactly the Europeans' attitude to the voters of the Catalan region of Spain. They voted to have independence or a form of independence from Spain. And whilst the Spanish police were brutally attacking their people, we had silence effectively in the European Union. Whilst their leaders have been arrested and put on charges of a European arrest warrant, both in Germany and in Scotland, where there is a trial of one of their ex-leaders, the European Union stands quiet, quite happy to see the people's vote ignored. Also, in Hungary and in Poland, you've had the people overwhelmingly vote for political parties that do not want to see mass immigration into their country. They do not want to be forced into having quotas put into their country. And what has the European Union said? They're not European values. They're not part of the European family. And so Oettinger, the Commission, want to punish Poland and Hungary. And they've said they're going to withdraw 33 billion euros in funding those countries have until they comply with what their European Union masters say. And once again this week, we've had another political election, this time in Slovenia. Now in Slovenia, they went to the polls, and what happened? The Slovenians voted 25% for a party like that of Hungary and Poland that believes that they should control their own borders. They should not have a mass open door migration policy like Angela Merkel did in Germany, and they voted that leader in. But in second place, in just over 12%, was a brand new party that was stated very clearly it was anti-elitist. So 37% of the Slovenians, of a population of 2 million, have decided they don't want mass immigration. They don't want control of the European Union's elites. They want to take control of their own country and have their own politicians. But what we are being told is that those two parties, or at least the one that won, the anti-immigration party and the one that wants to have more control of Slovenia by Slovenians, is unlikely to be in power. A coalition of the losers, those sitting on 8 and 9%, enough of them from the right and the left will come together to deny that Slovenian government power. We have seen that before in Sweden, where the Swedish Democrats have been ousted, even the fact that they led the polls by having a number of parties coalesce against them. We have seen it in Austria, where they didn't like the first president and decided that it needs to be voted again. But this time, on a second election, that the party that is slightly Eurosceptic is now in power. All across Europe, the European peoples are waking up and feeling fed up that the European Union, the Commission, the unelected are making decisions that are important on their lives. They are beginning to vote for political parties that say, stand up for us, look after our interests, stop working for the corporates, stop working for the lackeys, stop working for those who sit and work for the corporates and work to ensure that politicians keep their jobs at all costs. And the European Union is a tragedy that is ignoring the will of the people, backing those big corporates, backing their supporters, backing the unelected, backing the billionaires like Soros who only want to have their view of a liberal democracy in our European nations, and backing those who have no interest in supporting the 17.4 million people in Britain who want a proper Brexit, control of our borders, control of our finance, only our laws in our country. Well, I tell you, we're still fighting, and we will carry on this fight as the European peoples are waking up. Democracy means you carry out the will of the people, you ensure their votes matter, and if you don't like it, start campaigning after the decisions have been made. That is my weekly warning to you all again. Now, I understand that we've got some questions. And I'm sorry about my voice because we've been trying to argue a number of points here today. I've got John from Barnsley here. He says, the EU has created a low-wage economy. How can we pay for public services when so many are underpaid? John, this is one of the key factors why people like myself campaigned to leave the European Union. We believe that we're paying excessive sums of money to support European nations, repairs on their roads, building their kind of big airports, looking after their motorways, looking after infrastructure in Europe, and that money could be brought back into the UK. We secondly argued that large-scale migration was undercutting wages for a vast number of people in our nation. And I believe that a combination of a sensible government that allows immigration but on a fixed basis, where we have visas for those with highly skilled, where we look at the money that we've got and bring it back to reinvest in infrastructure projects of our own, to take some of our money to reinvest into the National Health Service, to look at our own, to reinvest in our own people, to create apprenticeship schemes that work, to look at those businesses where we can reduce taxation where they need to start off, and to rebalance our taxation system so those large corporates who have benefited from the European Union are actually taxed properly and funded within our own nation, then I think that would be one way that we could help to fund our public services. But we cannot do it whilst we're tied to the European Union, because we have to listen to their rules and their backers. I've got some other questions here that have been handed to me. I've got Liz from Facebook. Why is the government putting up with the EU bullying tactics as what is happening to our fishing industry? Well, I'll begin with the latter. What is happening to our fishing industry is an absolute disgrace. I would encourage everybody to sign up to the Facebooks, the Twitter, and anything to deal with Fishing for Leave and the wonderful Aaron Brown. I want to go and see Aaron, and I believe that we will have a meeting with him in my tour of the UK in later June of this year. Because as Aaron made clear to me, we have a £900 million industry at the moment that, in their view, if we properly left the European Union, if we took back control of our fishing rights, we would have a £7 billion industry that would happen to support many of those families in our coastal towns and encourage more growth and jobs and bring back a sense of fairness, prosperity and pride to Britain. And why do our MEPs fight to stay in the European Union? Well, to me, for those MEPs and lots of MPs, it's quite clear. There is a sense of a gravy train of earning huge amounts of money that they can stay on and absolutely have no impact on their future prospects because they can never be voted out as long as they do well in their party and stay on their lists. There are those who receive funding at universities. There are those who receive funding in science and business from the European Union who fear not getting the same level of funding once we leave from the UK government. Maybe competition scares the living daylights out of them. Maybe they actually have to work for a living rather than sponging off the state, because that's what many of them are. Effectively trying to take money from the state, which could be in the pockets of people who are actually doing proper jobs on a day-by-day basis. And that is why I think it's all down to the money. The people who want to stay in the European Union are benefactors of cash in one form or another, and those who are not are the ones who suffered from it. I'm going to take Fiona from Malvern Wells. Do we need an anti-elite party? Of course we do. We need a party that frightens those in power that they could lose their jobs. It's the only way politicians actively ever get concerned. Why do you think there's so many of them fighting at the moment to stay in the European Union? It's because they're going to lose their jobs. That's what politicians fear the most. I don't. I'm off. I'm gone. I came in to fight for Britain's future. I don't need necessarily, unless I believe that we won't get that future, to stay on. But these people don't. And that is why we need an anti-elite party in our nation. And I think it's coming, and people are getting more and more frustrated, and more people are coalescing around the idea. Now look, I know I've gone on for a while, so I'm just going to take one final question. I'm looking at this. Mark from Twitter. Since when was the collective punishment of member states of an EU ideal, or is it a German bad habit? Look, I don't buy into this idea that Germany is sitting there plotting and planning the punishment of Europe. No. What I believe is there a collective sense of arrogance sitting within those in the European Union who firmly believe that the only way to deal with the world's problems of climate issues, of impoverishment, of those people trying to flee countries under immigration, of potential wars, of the concerns of their own security, that the only way it can be done is by having a larger and larger organisation such as the European Union. It's just like those in business who believe the only way to sustain a thriving company is by merging with every small country and making you bigger and bigger until you become a monopoly. Well, the problem with that, it has a groupthink that no other way can ever be the right way. It has a groupthink that there is no other alternative to the rules and regulations that they impose. It has a groupthink that history doesn't change, and nor should they. And ultimately, it has a groupthink if anybody wishes to challenge their own theocracy of ideals of the European Union, of a globalist elite, of the ideas that the unelected should control us, then they should be challenged, destroyed, and their democracy removed at the end. That is my view for the week. Thanks very much for joining me.